Welcome to the Grizzly Times podcast with Louisa Wilcox, a place devoted to all things grizzly, where we interview scientists, managers, Native Americans, and others about their perspectives and experience with bears and their ecosystems. This comes at a critical time in a complex debate about grizzly bears, with the recent restoration of endangered species safeguards for the Yellowstone bear, but a new proposal to strip protections for Glacier's grizzlies, and when warming temperatures and development are transforming the bear's world. We hope that you find the information and views offered here useful as you shape your own conclusions. This is Louisa Wilcox with Grizzly Times, and the third of 4 episodes of my interview with Estella Leopold, the last remaining offspring of legendary conservationist writer and philosopher Aldo Leopold. Here, Estella shares stories about her career as a world-renowned paleobotanist, environmentalist, and teacher. This episode is devoted to Estella, her fascinating career as a paleobotanist that took her around the world, and long commitment to protecting the environment and to mentoring students. But her father never stopped calling her baby, and we'll start with that story.
With us, it was more or less well, what were you interested in doing today? What did you learn today, baby? He called me baby.
He called you baby throughout your...
Yeah, it was terrible.
Did you resist that, or...?
No, no.
Uh-huh.
I was just surprised.
Uh-huh.
Sitting in a college class and raise your hand, and Dad would
Baby?
say, baby, what have you got to say?
Oh. Well, I suppose you could get...
That's all right.
You and your mom, as two Estellas, confused. Maybe that, but yeah, baby.
Yeah, anyhow.
Yeah.
I found out why in the last year or two, I finally began to realize why he did that.
Oh.
Why did he call me baby my entire life instead of calling me Estella?
Right.
And he never called me Estella, ever.
Really?
Because there was only one Estella in his mind, and that was Estella Berger. Yeah.
Oh.
And so, like a fool, when I was a kid, and I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and the nuns couldn't pronounce my name, I was very upset because I was named Eloisa, Estella Leopold.
Mm-hmm.
And they called me Eloise and all kinds of funny things. And I said, Mom, the nuns can't pronounce my name. Could I just have your name?
Oh.
And Mother said, oh, sure, if you want. But
that was your idea.
That was my idea, and it was a very bad idea.
Ah.
I should be Eloisa, but anyhow.
But your dad didn't.
It's too bad now because it's set in concrete.
Right.
The Leopold family had unusual pets. Estella's brother Carl was a falconer, and Estella had a fox squirrel and several crows, the topic of some hilarious stories. She refers here to a crow I had as a kid that loved to fly off with the silverware, not unlike Estella's, who seemed to prefer toothbrushes.
Well, you also had
this wonderful time when we first had the crow, who was frequenting our backyard in Madison, Wisconsin. And Nina and I would look out the bathroom window in the morning, and there was Dad out there in the garden in his pajamas and slippers, digging worms for the crow, who was sitting there going, want to be fed. So we were very lucky to have the bird, but it was kind of a early morning riser.
Was that the crow that followed you to school?
Yes, it saw me going to school during the, except midsummer, spring and fall, and it kept flying around to figure out where I was in that building, and it finally found me in French class. 10 o'clock on Tuesdays. And it was so funny. And so, but the funniest part was that the crow, when I raised this little crow, the boy next door was raising pigeons.
Oh, boy.
And the pigeons were going, oh, and the crow learned to do this.
Really?
So then when he finally found me in French class, he was marching up and down the outside of the window on the sill and going, oh, and all the students were looking at him. It was so cute, but very disruptive. So pretty soon I got a note from my French teacher saying, here's a note, I want you to take this to your homeroom teacher now. So I went to my homeroom teacher, and I read the note on the way, and it said, it's that darn crow again. The teacher gave me the 1-2.
Yeah.
I had to box him up when I came to school. So it was too disruptive.
Right. You had several crows, didn't you? More than one.
Yeah, more than one. I had one in Denver, I think, for a while.
You did. Oh,
It didn't last very long. But
Yeah,
I had one,
yeah. Yeah, you described somewhere that the crow liked to steal toothbrushes at your camp.
Oh, that was at camp.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. The first crow, Sammy.
Uh-huh.
But with the pajama story goes with that one.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And that was incredible. And unlike your story, which I thought the crow flying off with the silver.
Oh, yeah.
Difficult.
Yeah.
But anyway, the girls did not appreciate their toothbrushes being stolen. But I don't know if I wrote in that essay about, later at Joy Camp, we had a theater complex where the children were all acting out a play, and it was Parents' Weekend. The parents were all coming and sitting on this bank of grass watching this operation going on. And Sammy, this first crow, sitting up there on the top of a tree, I could see him up there looking down over at all this. And here were the girls acting out the play.
Yeah, right.
So he took advantage of this. He came down and swooped down, and everybody went, ah! He dive bombed the audience.
You're kidding.
No kidding.
Huh.
Well, it seemed to them.
Yeah, yeah.
And making no noise. He just came over us, and everybody was terrified. And of course it broke up the play.
All right.
And so after that, I got the notice from the counselors that the owner, Miss Joy, wanted to see me in the morning in her office. And so I went, fear and trembling, I went into her office. And she said, I want you to see a copy of this telegram that I have sent to your mother, Estella. And it said, Estella, I am sending Estella's crow, COD, today by railroad to you. Take care, from Miss Joy. So we sent the crow back by railroad.
No negotiation.
Oh dear. It was very
well, it's funny
sad.
that your folks must have been fairly understanding to
they were.
Yeah,
They were indeed.
To let you have these animals and
It's funny.
Yeah. Was it your brother who had a hawk or two?
Carl was a falconer. He had a Cooper's hawk.
Yeah.
And I put a picture of that one in the book.
Yeah.
But then he had a pigeon hawk, which was a real falcon.
Yeah.
He was training this perfectly beautiful pigeon hawk.
Not all these vignettes about pets are happy, as when a neighbor released a great horned owl on the shack land. But they tell a lot about relationships in the family and with the natural world.
During the day, the next day, the owl stooped and took the pigeon hawk off its perch and was killing him. Now this was a trained falcon.
Right.
And we all wept, and we tried so hard to help this poor bird. But it was lethal. We lost the bird. And in the end, everybody wept because it was such a gorgeous little falcon.
Yeah.
It was so beautifully trained.
Yeah.
It was tough.
Yeah.
So at least we got rid of that owl. But
well, your brother must have been. Falconry was not the sport that it became. So was he figuring out how to train these?
yes, well, one of Dad's friends on the commission.
Oh.
Commission? Conservation Commission was a falconer.
Uh-huh.
And Carl approached him and said, would you please help me? I'd like to become a falconer. Which he did, and they did. But I have to finish the story about the owl.
Oh, yeah.
This owl, that next night, was outside in the woods, and it was lonely, and it was also hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it came and sat on the roof of the shack.
Yeah.
And we were asleep inside, and we had just put new shingles on the roof. And pretty soon the owl this is a great horned owl, a huge thing.
Yeah.
Got sleepy, and he started to skid down the roof. Pa-dum, 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 and then you could do whoosh, 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 whoosh. And he'd land up on the roof.
Uh-huh.
And then pretty soon,
Do it again.
ta-dum, 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 ta-dum. And this went on, and pretty soon in the dark, I was in the upper bunk, and Dad got up and started out the door, and I jumped out of my bed and was following. What's up, Daddy? And Dad said, that goddamn owl, says Dad.
Right.
So, anyway, he grabbed a flashlight and his penknife and walked down to the river barefoot. And I followed along. What's going to happen, Dad?
Yeah.
Well, he wouldn't talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
We got down to the river, and he reached out with his knife and cut a couple of willow branches
Uh-huh.
and began to stab the frogs.
Oh.
He got a couple of these, and he said, here, take these up to that owl. So we got to the cabin, and we got a ladder, and he helped me up the ladder. And
Uh-huh.
he said, just put it on his feet up there. Maybe that'll make him happy. Well, I did, and he didn't. It was like the frogs. Turns out owls don't like frog.
Oh.
So,
Who would have known? Huh.
so it just kept going on. Oh, it was just very funny story.
Estella here shares the story of her illustrious career, her work in Bikini Atoll, China, Colorado, and elsewhere. She goes on to tell about her work to protect the environment, starting with the fight to save the Grand Canyon River from being dammed, to her successful campaign to save the incredible fluorescent fossil beds in Colorado, and her work to keep high-level radioactive nuclear waste from being dumped near the Columbia River in Washington state. It is especially noteworthy that the battles over Grand Canyon and fluorescent were won before the passage of the majority of our environmental laws. What blew me away here was Estella's integrative approach to conservation, which of course was in her genes.
You tell the story, maybe others do too, but you tell the story that when you were very young, when you were young, your dad asked you what you wanted to be, and you responded, with all your siblings being scientists, your older siblings, I want to be a bugologist because everything else is taken. But you didn't. Maybe you could just describe sort of your evolution into what you became.
Well, was taken meant that I was aware at that young age that Starker was in wildlife ecology, taking after Dad's field. Mm-hmm. Luna was going into the rivers and hydrology, and Nina was a geographer, and Carl was a botanist. And what was left, and so anyway. But anyhow, it was fun thinking that way. And the answer was, Dad said, Estella, wonderful, I'll take you down to the bookstore and we'll buy you a copy of Spring Flora of Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
By Norman Fassett, and I'll buy you a vasculum, which for collecting plants.
Yeah.
And let's see what you can do with that, says Dad.
Uh-huh.
And he did. And so when I went into school, I learned that botany was my love because I love plants.
Right.
And I stuck with it.
Uh-huh.
So that was fun.
Yeah. And your interest in pollen, how did that come about?
Well, by actual chance, I ended up at Yale Graduate School.
Uh-huh.
And it was an accident because I was lined up to go to UCLA. A friend of Luna's came by the house and had a dinner with us, and he said, what are your plans, Estella? And I said, I'm going to UCLA for graduate school, and he said, "Oh, no. You want to go to UCLA to study botany?" "Yes." And he said, "Well, don't do that. My wife took her PhD at UCLA, and it took her 10 years to get the degree, and they had loaded her up with all kinds of chores that other people didn't want to do, and they didn't think much of women down there at that time." So I said, "Oh, well, what am I going to do? It's already summertime, and I'm lined up to go in the fall." And he said, "Well, just apply to Yale." I said, "Yeah, but it's already summertime." And he said, "Oh, just write to Paul Sears. He'll let you in."
Wow.
So I wrote a letter to Paul Sears and said, "I'd like to enter graduate school and study under him." And he said, "Oh, come along." And he found some money for my TA-ship.
Oh, great.
And when I got there, then what was I going to do? Paul said. Dr. Sears said. And I said, "Well, I'd like to do something in the mountains of Wyoming or something. I'm not sure what. Studying plant ecology." Anyway, it wasn't very clear, my answer, of course. But he said, "Why don't you get interested in palynology, pollen work? This is something I've enjoyed very much." I said, "Yes, I'm very aware of your excellent work in pollen work. But I'm not sure we can solve some of the major problems with pollen work." But he said, "You can't?" He said, "Are you afraid of a challenge?" And I said, "Oh, well, that was a threat." So I thought about it again. And the more I worked on it, then I worked with Luna's samples from the Moorcroft Terrace in Wyoming, and found that there was lots of fun dealing with pollen in the post-glacial river terraces of Wyoming.
Right.
And so I decided to stick with it. And sure enough, it's been a very fulfilling field because it permits you to work with the past and work with climate systems and forest evolution, and lots of fascinating problems connected to that.
Absolutely. And you did work, so you did work in Connecticut, right? Didn't you?
Yes, that's post-glacial in Connecticut.
And then your work took you around the world eventually.
Well, when I was fortunate to land a job with the USGS because Preston E. Cloud Jr. had opened up an office in the paleontology branch for a pollen person.
Oh, my.
And a tree ring person and so forth. So anyway, I applied and I got the pollen position, which is great because I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And so that was a big step forward. And that gave you all kinds of freedom. At that time, the USGS was well funded. They had a lot of excellent, broad scientists in it. And I just was very fortunate to work there.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, they've certainly suffered a lot of budget cuts lately.
Yeah,
but I mean,
it has, and there's been a lot of changes in administrators too, which made a difference.
Right. But it seemed like it was a great base to leap into problems around the country and indeed around the world.
Well, there were great opportunities for me because Preston Cloud told his geological survey people that here's this new person that she's working in pollen work and maybe she can help you date your rocks for you and maybe she can tell you something about the past climates or something. And so I began to get all these samples coming in and I would try and figure out what it all meant and what. But you can't do any of that without knowing the basic age of the rocks.
Right.
So just before isotopes, we were working with sediments that were dated by vertebrates. The evolution of the horse or the dog or whatever was critical information, and it could tell you about what period in the last 60 million years the rocks might be.
Yeah.
So with that information, then it came isotopes, and we began to get isotopic dates.
Uh-huh.
So we had ways of checking. So if you could get the pollen figured out, then you could determine the type of forest, and if you knew the age, you could start putting a picture together
Yeah.
as a chronological sequence.
Yeah.
It was lots of fun.
Populating with the animals and just everything that was
Yeah.
there. That is.
And working with the survey, we were right there with the vertebrate paleontologists,
Oh, yeah.
the people that were working on shells,
Right.
the people that were working in the Pacific on one of these guys on the Bikini Atoll.
Aha.
And he came to me and said, Estella, you've got to do pollen at the Bikini Atoll core. And I said, I do? He said, oh, yes, you do. Why? He said, well, because under Bikini Atoll, about 1,000 foot down, the core hit basalt.
Uh-huh.
And that was a mountaintop.
Right.
And so we already know from that the Pacific plate was sinking.
Right.
And through all this time, which is
Right.
about 15 million years.
Uh-huh.
And so we need you to look at the core and tell us what the vegetation was in Micronesia, that is
Yeah.
Bikini at that time. And I said, but Dr. Ladd, I don't know anything about the tropical vegetation of Micronesia.
Uh-huh.
He said, oh, that's all right. You go to the National Museum and spend the summer there, and you can learn all about the present vegetation of Micronesia.
Wow.
So I did. I spent the whole summer there at USGS expense,
Yeah.
working with herbarium and the botanists who knew all this, and had
Uh-huh.
just, in fact, published a very nice long book on the plants of Micronesia. So
Uh-huh.
I went through and got, in the herbarium, we got samples of the pollen
Wow.
from these sheets,
Right.
going back through the important families, the tropical families that
Yeah.
I knew I should look for.
Right.
So then when we got the fossil stuff, we began to look at this, and we found, ooh, here comes all these tropical plants, and we put them all together, and it looked like a intertidal swamp of mangroves,
Really?
and growing in 15 million years ago,
Huh.
at a depth of 1,000 feet below the present
Oh my.
sea level.
Yeah.
Obviously, the whole thing
Yeah.
had been sinking.
Right, right, right.
So that was the basis of our work. And
Wow.
it was just, the U.S. Geological Survey was this marvelous source of
Right.
marvelous people who knew the history of the areas, and who had, and the sources of sediments that were so special to determine their age and their content.
Yeah.
A lot of good conclusions could come from that combination.
Yeah, absolutely. And then at some point you were part of a group that went to China after
Yes.
the thaw, the Nixon thaw, I
Yes.
guess, and worked with a paleobotanist there for
Ostensibly, we were supposed to go and we were going to work with the Peking man, Beijing
yeah, yeah.
man, and that was an excuse for this expedition. There were 10 of us, and I kept telling them, you don't need me, I work on this stuff here in the Rocky Mountains.
Right, right.
And they said, oh yes, you need to come along. So anyway, I got to go to China, and I became such an admirer of their science. They have just done marvelous developments in China, and their palynologists, people working with pollen,
Yeah.
have just produced all kinds of wonderful literature in the
Huh.
scientific papers on the history of Chinese vegetation.
Right.
So there was much to learn, and I was so fortunate. I was very pleased to know these good scientists.
Yeah.
So after that, I began to get some students coming over from China to work in my lab,
Oh, nice.
which is fun. I still have one. He's there now. He's a how would you describe? He's probably one of the best pollen experts of China. He's just really marvelous.
Huh. And you didn't know him before? I mean, you didn't know any of these guys?
He was a young man.
Right.
But he studied there, and he came to my lab, and we published together. He's lots of fun.
Right. So did you travel around the countryside? Did you see much?
Yes, we had a couple of weeks, and we visited all kinds of places. Thanks to Gengwu Liu, his name is, and his wife, we went by train all over China, visiting different sites. Had a wonderful tour, in fact, of the river, the Yangtze River.
Yeah.
We got into one of these boats looking at the dam site, which is being under construction.
Oh, right.
So impressive and so horrible. And we were having dinners with some of the geologists there in China, and we asked my friend and I, and Gengwu was very quiet, but we'd say, "Why are you building this dam? You're going to be sorry. It's going to interfere with this wonderful river traffic that you have today." And anyhow, the end was that the engineers said, "Oh, we have to build it because we need the hydro energy. We have got to get out of this habit of burning coal to get electrical energy. And that's the only way we can do it." So we entered these boats, Gengwu and his wife and my friend, and I took one of my Nina's grandchildren with me on this trip. And 70 meters above the surface of the river, we could see archaeological stations which were going to get flooded by this dam, and it was really a shame. So we went all the way into the headwaters. It was very exciting.
That is exciting.
Oh yeah, it was a very exciting trip. And now all that's flooded.
Yeah.
If you did it again today, you'd be riding the top of the river. And they evacuated all these beautiful little villages that were all along the edges of these canyons. So, it's so sad. But that's what they wanted to do. So.
Right. The Faustian bargain of energy. Yeah. There is no free lunch in terms of impacts, whether it's coal or hydro development. But so you got very involved in conservation for a long time, and still are. And I wanted to ask you. So I was thinking about the damming of, eventually of Glen Canyon and your efforts there. But before that, you were involved in a fight for these amazing fossil beds that had shales with just an incredible number of species. And
the fluorescent.
The fluorescent, yes.
Well,
and maybe you could talk a little bit about what that experience was like.
Well, before that effort, one time Luna came back to Madison to visit Mother, and we're sitting around the lunch table, and he said, "Oh, I've just been so discouraged because President Kennedy had a gathering of people, including the Secretary of Interior and the Bureau of Rec, and we were all sitting around a table, and they were talking about building a dam in the Grand Canyon." And he said, "God damn, we can't build a canyon in the Grand Canyon."
Right.
And he said, "But they're talking about doing it. They're writing a bill to see if they can get the money." And so anyway, after that, I returned to Denver and talked to my friends, and I got this itch to do something about this. So we began, and we had this local group called the Colorado Open Space Council, a statewide conservation group. And there to talk about, let's see what we can do if we can get the public excited about this saving Grand Canyon. And so we had bumper stickers printed, "Save Grand Canyon," and we got them all over the place.
Yeah. Great.
And well, that was kind of fun. And then we began to use radio and the press. The press was very helpful to us.
Right.
and we used even television, and they would come and interview us, and field trips, and we'd take people from Mountain Club or Sierra Club or whoever, and the press with us to the field. And well, in this case, after the Grand Canyon fight, we began to try and save the fluorescent fossil beds, which were particularly important fossils in the Colorado area.
Right.
And really needed to be saved because there was a threat from the building summer homes industry to park buildings on top of these beautiful fossil beds.
Yeah.
And we started up a terrific fight for fluorescent. Eventually, there were bills that were designed by local congressmen and by the senator from Colorado, who we escorted to the field and took him with a hand lens to the beds and showed him these fossils. You just pick up the rocks and there are these big leaves and flowers and whatnot.
Right.
He was so impressed that he went home and wrote a bill about it for the Senate.
Oh, nice.
And he got it through the Senate rather quickly.
Uh-huh.
But he was very enthusiastic.
Yeah.
So now then we had to fight hard to get it through the House.
Yeah.
And that was very difficult, indeed.
Yes.
But we finally managed in the end. But anyhow, so the bills finally got through, but it was a 6-year fight. There were a number of us in Colorado working hard on it, especially Betty Willard, who became very important in the, was it Nixon administration? Anyway, she became on the council for environmental management, environmental quality.
Yeah, would have been right after
that
National
council.
Environmental.
She was appointed to that.
Wow.
So she was great.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about what you learned that might be applicable to.
Well, I think the most important thing was the importance to use the press. They can help us a lot, but they have to be explained to, they have to visit the site, they have to understand it, and then they've got the expression, they can help us restate the problems to the public. And the radio, I mean, the press is just like the fights that some of these young people have to protect their special places in nature. They ought to realize they can get a lot of help from the local media, and should, because that's very productive.
But you can't just be anybody calling the press and say, hey, I've got an issue. I mean, it sounds like in your case, you had people with authority, intellectual prowess like yourself.
Well, at the time, I wasn't anybody, but we worked together. So it's the coordination of a community effort that can get attention from to the Congress and to decision makers.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of experience yourself.
But just reading your work, it seems like we arrived at the same, some similar conclusions. You know, with the media, certainly you had help from an attorney with the Environmental Defense Fund, and just the working of the lobbying of politicians in D.C. and getting them
on the
educated.
fluorescent fight, the first thing that we talked about was Betty Willard and I. She's the one that ended up in the CEQ.
Right.
We needed to get to court. Now, how are we going to do that? And they said, well, Science Magazine had this article about a man named Yannicone who decided that sue the bastards was his moniker. Sue the bastards. That's the kind of guy. So I finally got on the phone and I found how to reach Yannicone. Got him on the phone and said, would you please come out here? We'll help you, but we need you to help us get into court. And he said, well, I have to come and visit the place first. So he came to visit, and he flew out, or was it train? I can't even remember anymore. He brought his wife and his son, and they spent the weekend out there, and we took them down there, and they dug fossils and whatnot. And he said, the first thing is I need a lawyer to help me, local lawyer.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing Betty and I thought of was our favorite Dick Lamb,
Right.
who became governor eventually, but
Yeah.
anyhow, he was a good member of the community conservation groups.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember which club, but conservation for
Right.
sure. And so Dick Lamb got involved, and pretty soon we were in court and stopping these developers who were going to, and we already knew that there was, the Department of Interior was interested in building a park there, or a national monument.
Right.
And that was one reason why the developers were interested, and they had a sure place to sell summer homes because it would soon be a national park or
Oh,
something.
right.
That was a terrible situation.
Mm.
But anyhow, and Yannicone, he was absolutely marvelous.
Mm.
So Yannicone took us aside after we had visited the site and shown him the fossils, and he was very entranced. He's no mean scientist, by the way. He had very broad background in geology. We were always impressed. Right?
That's helpful.
Listening to that guy when he's on the stand. It was rather quickly we were in court and presenting the evidence and the case to a judge, and Yannicone and Dick Lamb standing by and hoping we could do well. Well, eventually, we finally got a reasonably good judgment from the court, and but it was a temporary stay of the bulldozers. Don't let the bulldozers roll onto the area.
Right.
For 30 days. Well, 30 days later we had to be back in court to make sure that it didn't happen then.
Yeah.
So we kept approaching these repeat deadlines, and eventually got the doggone public turned on, thanks to the press and all that. Well, you know how it goes. We finally made it. So the bill went through, and President Nixon signed the bill, and we were very happy.
Congratulations. Yeah, remarkably, President Nixon did a lot of good stuff for the environment.
He was amazingly good.
Yeah.
The Clean Water Act happened under his administration.
The Endangered Species Act he signed.
The Endangered Species Act.
I mean, he was quite, he was on a roll.
Yes, and he was aware that there was a lot of public support for some of these ideas.
Absolutely.
So thank heavens. One of the issues that we were talking about in terms of good science related to the proposal to bury high-level radioactive waste
I want to ask you about
deep repositories in the northwestern states somewhere, Oregon, Washington, Idaho. And in that respect, I served on a committee, which are just a citizens committee that was asked to listen in on what the big guys were saying in the government. And what the contractor had said about the deep repository in Washington was, oh, it'll be all right. They have assurance that if in case the encasements for the high-level radioactive waste broke, the liquids would have very slow progress into the environment, and they wouldn't go very far because they know that they only go such and such a rate for a year or something. And I, knowing the U.S. Geological Survey, called on a USGS hydrologist to come up and to talk to us in the Citizens Committee.
Right.
And we asked him some questions, and he said, well, you know, I don't think that's very realistic, because if you, I'm going to tell you, he said, we found out in our studies of river systems in the 3 states that the waters enter the system in the headwaters, And they travel underground as aquifers under the river, and then they come up into the river.
Oh, right.
And so we said, hey, look, everybody, this is a system you don't want to interrupt, and you don't want to put nuclear high-level waste at that precarious level under the river.
Right.
Because it'll get everywhere, including to the food chain and so on.
Yeah.
Now, Christine Gregoire, at that point, was our Secretary of State, or whatever it is, in the state of Washington, before she became governor.
Right.
Just before she got to be
Okay.
governor.
Yeah.
And she arranged a gathering of opinions between 3 states administrators, and they all decided no, they didn't want to let the contractors build the deep level repositories.
Mm-hmm.
So we owed it to Christine. But from this little committee, it went to the administrators and on up, and she finally got the word, helped us out.
That's a great story of science prevailing and having an ally in the political world.
Yeah, and the importance of this guy in the U.S. Geological Survey,
absolutely,
who had done all this river work,
and
knew what he was talking about.
Yes, absolutely.
This interview continues in episode 4.